My name is Alex. I'm 32 years old, and after a decade of grinding, I'm a lead software engineer at a company I genuinely love. I live in a city my parents called a waste of time, in a condo I bought with money they said I'd never make. And last Tuesday, sitting in a stuffy attorney's office, I found out that my parents had given my entire college fund, a trust left by my grandfather, to my younger sister, Chloe. They left me with nothing but the debt I'd spent my entire adult life clawing my way out of. Before I tell you how I finally put an end to decades of being the family's forgotten son and made them answer for it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, hit that like button, and please subscribe if you've ever felt completely and utterly invisible to your own family. It all started long before the money. It started with a fundamental difference in who my sister and I were, and what my parents chose to value. I was the quiet one, the observer. While other kids were outside playing catch, I was inside taking apart old radios, trying to understand how they worked. My world was one of logic, of systems, of cause and effect. When we got our first family computer, a clunky beige tower that whirred like a jet engine, I was mesmerized. I spent hours teaching myself to code, creating simple little games and animations. It was my passion. But to my parents, it was just Alex staring at his screen again. They saw no value in it, no future. It was a weird, antisocial hobby that they worried would make me strange. Chloe was the opposite. She was loud, vibrant, and relentlessly social. She didn't build things, she decorated them. She didn't solve problems, she created dramatic narratives around them. My parents called this creativity. Her messy, paint-splattered art projects were framed and hung in the living room. My first functioning bit of code was dismissed with a sigh and a, "Can't you do that later?" We have guests. I remember one summer when I was 12, I did yard work for every neighbor on our block. I saved up $200, coin by coin, to buy a better graphics card for the computer. It took me all of July and August. When I finally bought it and installed it myself, I felt like I'd conquered the world. I tried to show my dad how it improved the rendering speed. He glanced at the screen for a second, grunted, and said, "That's nice, son. Now can you help me bring in the groceries?" The very next week, Chloe decided she wanted a horse. Not to ride seriously, just the idea of it. My parents spent thousands on lessons and rentals for a hobby she abandoned in less than 2 months. When I quietly pointed out the disparity, my mother just patted my arm. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice laced with that gentle pity I came to despise, "you're so sensible. Chloe is a dreamer. Dreamers just need a little more help to get their feet off the ground." I was the rock, and she was the kite. I just never realized they were using me as the anchor to let her fly. The conversation about college started when I was a junior in high school. My grandfather, my dad's dad, had been a careful man. He'd set up 2 trusts, one for me and one for Chloe, to ensure we could get an education without the burden of debt. He'd shown me the paperwork once, long ago, before he passed. He'd winked and said, "This is your launch pad, Alex. Use it to build something great." I took that promise to heart. I studied relentlessly, aced my SATs, and got into a great engineering program. My future felt mapped out, secure. I kept working my part-time job at a local diner, saving up my own money for books and expenses, because that's who I was. I was responsible. I didn't want to just take the gift for granted. My parents, however, treated the 2 trusts very differently from the start. Mine was spoken of in hushed, serious tones. "It's invested, Alex," my father would say, looking important. "We have to be smart about it. Can't touch it at the wrong time." It was framed as this sacred, untouchable asset that had to be managed with grim seriousness. Chloe's trust, on the other hand, was treated like her personal slush fund. When she wanted a new car for her 16th birthday, a shiny red convertible, there was no talk of market timing. They pulled from her trust, calling it an early investment in her social development. My car was a 15-year-old sedan my uncle was going to junk. I spent a whole month in our garage, covered in grease, replacing the alternator and the brake pads myself. My dad saw me out there struggling and just said, builds character. When Chloe's car got a flat tire, he drove an hour to her friend's house to change it for her. The message was clear. My independence was expected, her dependence was encouraged. I was a problem to be managed efficiently. She was a project to be endlessly funded. The day I got my acceptance letter was one of the proudest moments of my life. I ran into the living room, waving it in the air. My mom smiled, a distracted, polite smile. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear." My dad glanced up from his newspaper. "Good school. Going to be expensive, that was it." No celebration, no excitement. Just a pragmatic, almost weary, acknowledgement. When it came time to actually pay the first tuition bill, I sat down with them at the kitchen table, expecting to finally discuss the trust. That's when they dropped the bomb. "Alex, the market has been in a downturn," my dad said, avoiding my eyes and shuffling some papers that had nothing to do with finances. "It would be unwise to liquidate any assets right now. You'd be losing money." And my mom chimed in, her voice full of that fake sympathy. "It's just bad timing, honey. We think it's better to let it recover. You can take out some student loans for the first year or two. It's what most kids do. It'll be good for you. Teaches you responsibility." I was stunned. Responsibility? I had been working since I was 12. I had my own savings account. Chloe hadn't worked a day in her life. Just a few months prior, they'd funded her cultural immersion trip to Europe, which consisted of 6 weeks of partying in Paris and Rome, all paid for by her wisely managed trust. I brought this up, my voice trembling slightly. "But you just paid for Chloe's trip to Italy." And my father's face hardened. "That's different, Alex. That was an educational expense. This is a market principle. You're smart enough to understand that. I wasn't smart enough to understand. I was just smart enough to know I was being lied to. So I did what they told me to do. I took out the loans. I went to college and lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one shelving books in the library and another washing dishes in the campus dining hall, all while carrying a full course load in engineering. It was brutal. I was always tired. I saw friends going on spring break trips while I was picking up extra shifts. I called home once, desperate, because my laptop had died right before finals week. I asked if they could possibly help me get a new one. My mother's response? "Oh, Alex, you need to learn to budget better." They sent me $100. Chloe posted pictures of her new designer handbag on social media the same day. After graduation, the struggle continued. I had a degree, but I also had a mountain of debt that felt insurmountable. I moved into a tiny, run-down apartment with a leaky faucet and a questionable smell. I landed a junior-level internship at a tech firm, making barely enough to cover rent and my loan payments. I was exhausted, but I was determined. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on any project, no matter how tedious, and I learned everything I could. I poured all the focus and intensity that I used to put into taking apart radios into my work. And for the first time, someone noticed. His name was Mr. Henderson, the head of my department. He was an older guy, stern and quiet, and he didn't say much. But he watched. He saw me staying late. He saw the quality of my work. One evening, he stopped by my desk as I was wrestling with a particularly nasty bit of code. He just stood there for a minute, watching me. I was sure I was about to be reprimanded for something. Instead, he said, "You have a good mind for this, Alex. You see the whole structure, not just the pieces." It was the most profound praise I had ever received. It was a simple observation, but it was something my own father had never, ever said to me. Mr. Henderson became my mentor. He challenged me, gave me bigger projects, and advocated for me. When a full-time position opened up, he recommended me without hesitation. He'd tell me things like, "Your work ethic is going to take you far, and I'm impressed with how you solved that." Each piece of praise was like a drop of water on dry soil. It was the validation I had been craving my whole life, and it wasn't coming from my family, it was coming from a stranger who judged me solely on my merit. Over the next few years, I climbed. I got promoted, then promoted again. My salary grew. I paid off one student loan, then another. The day I made the final payment on the last one, I sat in my car and cried. It was a release of a decade of anxiety and pressure. I had done it. All by myself. I was finally free. Or so I thought. Which brings me back to last Tuesday. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman with a crisp, professional voice, introducing herself as being from the law office that managed my family's estate planning. My heart jumped a little. I hadn't thought about the trust in years. I had written it off as another one of my parents' empty promises. She explained that with my grandfather's estate being formally closed out, there was some final paperwork regarding the trust established in my name. I needed to come in and sign off on the final accounting. I felt a flicker of something, not excitement, but a strange, weary curiosity. What would be there? A few $1,000s, maybe? Whatever was left after the market downturn they'd been so worried about a decade ago. I agreed to the appointment, feeling a weird sense of detachment. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken awkwardness. The attorney, Ms. Albright, wouldn't quite meet my eye. She sat me down at a large mahogany table and slid a thin folder across to me. "This is the final accounting for the trust established by your grandfather for your benefit," she said formally. I opened it. The first page was a summary. It listed the initial principal amount, which was a significant sum, more than enough to have paid for my entire education 4 times over. My breath caught in my throat. Then I saw the subsequent lines. Withdrawals. A long list of them, starting the year Chloe turned 16. The car, the trip to Europe, but it didn't stop there. There were huge sums, tens of thousands of dollars at a time, listed as capital investment for Chloe's boutique, another for Chloe's art gallery, a series of failed, vanity business ventures my sister had pursued in her 20s, all bankrolled by my grandfather's legacy. By my legacy. I flipped to the last page. The current balance was listed in stark, black ink, $000. The trust had been completely emptied years ago. My signature wasn't needed to receive a final disbursement. It was needed to acknowledge that the account was closed and empty. I looked at Ms. Albright. My parents, they were the trustees. She nodded, her expression full of pity. They had discretionary authority. It was all signed by them. Legally. The word echoed in the silent room. It may have been legal, but it was the most profound betrayal of my life. I wasn't just the unfavored son. I was the secret bank account for the golden child. My future had been liquidated to fund her failures. I drove from the lawyer's office in a daze. The city streets, the traffic, the noise, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. The only thing I could see clearly was the image of that final balance, $000. I didn't go home. I went to the one place I had been avoiding for years. I drove straight to my parents' house, the house where I grew up, the house where every wall seemed to whisper that I wasn't enough. They were surprised to see me on a weekday afternoon. My mother was in the kitchen, and my father was in his armchair reading the newspaper, the same as he ever was. Chloe was there too, lounging on the sofa, scrolling on her phone. Of course she was. She had moved back in 6 months ago after her latest business, a custom jewelry line, had gone under. "Alex!" "What a surprise," my mother chirped, wiping her hands on her apron. I didn't answer. I walked past her to the coffee table and dropped the folder from the attorney's office onto it. The sound it made was quiet, but it landed with the force of a grenade. "What is this?" my father asked, lowering his paper. I just looked at him. "It's the final accounting for my college fund," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "The one you told me was in a market downturn. The one that was supposed to teach me responsibility." My mother's smile faltered. Chloe looked up from her phone, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. My father picked up the folder and opened it. He scanned the pages, his face growing pale. He knew exactly what it was. My mother came over and looked over his shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my," she whispered. The denial came first, weak and pathetic. "There must be some kind of mistake," my father mumbled, not looking at me. "No," I said, my voice like steel. "There's no mistake. Every dollar is accounted for. Every dollar you took from me and gave to her," I pointed at Chloe, who now looked like a cornered animal. "You sold my future to pay for her hobbies. That's when the gaslighting began." "Now, Alex, don't be so dramatic," my mother said, her tone shifting to one of placating condescension. "We didn't take anything from you. We just reallocated the resources where they were needed most. Chloe has always been the creative one, the one with visions. She just needed more support." Chloe started to sniffle, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why are you attacking me?" she cried. "I didn't know. They just wanted to help me." My father finally found his voice, and it was full of indignation. "Frankly, I'm disappointed in your attitude, Alex. Look at you. You're successful. You have a great job, a nice place. You obviously didn't need the money. Your sister did. A family helps each other. For you to come in here and throw this in our faces after all these years, it's selfish. It's incredibly selfish." I stood there in the living room, listening to their symphony of excuses, and something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, clean break. The part of me that had spent 32 years craving their approval, their validation, their love, it just died. I looked at my father, a man so convinced of his own righteousness. I looked at my mother, a woman who weaponized sympathy. And I looked at my sister, a 30-year-old child who had never once faced a consequence. Selfish. I repeated the word, and a laugh, cold and humorless, escaped my lips. "You want to talk about selfish? You let me drown in debt. You told me it would build character while you were signing checks from my account to buy her a convertible. I lived on nothing. I worked myself to the bone. Not once did you call to see if I was okay. Not once did you offer a single dollar of real help. You only ever called to ask why I wasn't visiting more often." I turned to Chloe, whose tears were now flowing freely. "And you," I said, my voice dropping. "You knew. Maybe you didn't know the exact account it was coming from, but you knew. You knew you were living a life you hadn't earned, funded by money that magically appeared whenever you had a whim. You saw how I was living. You saw me struggle. And you never said a word." I picked up the folder from the table. "This isn't about the money anymore," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time. "I don't need it. As you so helpfully pointed out, I did just fine on my own. No thanks to you. This is about the lies. This is about the fact that you looked your own son in the eye and stole from him, and you have the audacity to call me selfish for being hurt by it." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just let the truth hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly behind me on that chapter of my life. For a week, there was silence. Then, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice frantic, hysterical. "Alex, you have to help us. The bank, they're calling the loan. The one we took out for Chloe's boutique." The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Of course. The final, disastrous business venture, the one that had drained the last of my trust fund, hadn't been fully funded by my inheritance. They had co-signed a massive business loan to cover the rest, certain that this time, Chloe's vision would pay off. It hadn't. Now the bank wanted its money, and my parents were on the hook. They were facing foreclosure. They were about to lose the house. The very house where they had sat and judged me, where they had plotted the reallocation of my future. They came to my condo that evening. It was the first time they had ever visited. They stood in my living room, looking around at the life I had built for myself, their faces a mixture of awe and desperation. My father, the proud patriarch, couldn't even look me in the eye. My mother started crying the moment she walked in the door. "We don't know what to do, Alex," she sobbed. "We could lose everything. You're our only hope." They expected me to write a check. They had spent my entire life treating me like a failure, a disappointment, an afterthought. Now that their golden child had failed them spectacularly, they came running to the son whose resilience they had taken for granted. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as an ATM. An emergency fund they had never contributed to. I let them finish their panicked, rambling plea. I let the silence stretch out. Then, I spoke. I didn't yell. I didn't recriminate. The anger had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I looked at my parents, these two people who had caused me so much pain, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. "I'm not going to give you the money," I said quietly. My mother's sobs hitched. My father's head snapped up, a flash of his old indignation in his eyes. "What? Alex, after everything, we're your family." "Are we?" I asked, my voice even. "Family doesn't do what you did to me. Family doesn't build one child up by tearing the other down. You didn't treat me like family. You treated me like an inconvenience until you needed a bailout. So, we're not going to handle this like family. We're going to handle this like a business." I walked over to my desk and picked up a notepad. "I will not give you the money. But I will offer you a loan." They stared at me, dumbfounded. "I will loan you the exact amount you need to satisfy the bank," I continued, "secured with a second mortgage against your house. We will have a formal, legally binding contract drawn up by my attorney. You will make monthly payments to me, with a fair market interest rate of 5%. If you miss a payment, penalties will apply, just like with any other banks." My mother stared at me in horror. "You want us to pay you interest? You want to put a lien on our home? We're your parents. You were the trustees of my education fund," I corrected her gently. "You taught me all about market principles and the importance of a sound investment. Well, this is my investment. And these are my terms. You have no other options. The bank will take your house and you'll be left with nothing. I am offering you a way out." The only way out. My father sank onto my sofa, his face ashen. The fight had completely gone out of him. He looked old and defeated. Chloe, who had been standing silently by the door, just looked at the floor. For the first time, the consequences of her choices were not being absorbed by someone else. They were real, and they were staring her right in the face. They had no choice. They agreed. It's been 6 months since that day. My lawyer drew up the paperwork, and they signed it. Every month, on the 1st, a payment is transferred from their account to mine. It's not about the money, it's about the principle. It's about the tangible, undeniable acknowledgement of the debt they owe me, a debt that is far more than financial. Our relationship, if you can call it that, is now purely transactional. The phone calls are no longer filled with manipulative platitudes or demands for my time. They are brief, formal, and centered around the loan. The power dynamic has been irrevocably altered. They can no longer dismiss me or my success. They are, in a very real sense, working for me. They had to sell their second car. My mother had to get a part-time job as a receptionist. And Chloe, for the first time in her 30 years on this earth, is working full-time as a waitress. The universe has a funny, brutal way of balancing the books. As for me, I feel a sense of peace I have never known. The weight of seeking their approval has been lifted. I finally understand that their inability to love me properly was their failure, not mine. My worth was never tied to their validation. I had proved my worth to myself, every single day, for a decade. I have reconnected with my grandfather's brother, my great-uncle, who told me he'd always been disgusted by my parents' blatant favoritism and was proud of the man I had become. Mr. Henderson, my mentor, is now my business partner. We're launching our own software startup. I am building my own family, my own legacy, based on mutual respect and earned trust. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness for the family I wish I'd had, for the brother-sister bond that was poisoned by jealousy and entitlement. But then I look at my life, at the things I have built with my own two hands, and I feel nothing but a profound sense of vindication and liberation. I am finally free. So, I have to ask you guys, have you ever had to draw a hard line with your family to protect your own peace? What was the moment you realized you had to choose yourself? Let me know your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Thank you for listening.